Restoration of Capitalism in Poland. This essay is a part of a series of articles examining the problem of the restoration of capitalism in the countries that began the socialist revolution in the 20th century. This series tries to evaluate the experience of the struggle for socialism to prepare for future struggles. This work will contain two parts. First, the actual outline of events in Poland from the moment of the destruction of its Communist Party in the 1930s and until the current events, that is, the restoration of capitalism and the struggle against Russia as a part of NATO. The second part will contain conclusions made on the basis of these and other similar events. Part 1. Outline of Events. Section 1. Thermidor in the USSR leads to the destruction of the Polish Communist Party. In 1938, Stalin dissolved the Polish Communist Party, accusing it of Trotskyism and of being made up of spies. This episode in the history of the communist movement is best described by Isaac Deutscher, who at one time was a member of the Polish Communist Party, although he was in opposition to its leadership. In The Tragedy of the Polish Communist Party, Deutscher writes, "The first sore point was the bureaucratic regime in the Comintern, which penetrated deep into its parties, including the Communist Party of Poland. The struggle between the so-called triumvirate, Stalin, Zinoviev, and Kamenev, and Trotsky then came to the surface, and from the very beginning it assumed an evil character unprecedented in our movement. The European Communist parties were in confusion, because until now Trotsky, along with Lenin, had been the most important inspirer and greatest authority in the International. In the fall of 1923, the central committees of the Polish, French, and the German Communist parties, in one form or another, informed the Central Committee of the Soviet Party of their protest against the brutal forms of attacks on Trotsky. The participants in these protests did not intend to support any aspect of Trotsky's policies. They simply warned the Soviet leadership about the harm that this campaign against Trotsky was causing to the communist movement and called on the All-Union Communist Party to resolve controversial issues in a communist, comradely manner. This incident, however, cast a long shadow. Stalin never forgot or forgave this protest. Zinoviev, who was then chairman of the ECCI, considered the protest as a vote of no confidence in him personally. The Communist parties of Poland, France, and Germany were immediately drawn into the internal Soviet conflict. The leadership of the International, in other words, Zinoviev and Stalin, removed from their posts the main leaders of these three parties who dared to defend Trotsky. A pretext was found. The mistakes of these leaders, the three V's, in November 1923. They were expelled for, quote, opportunism, right-wing deviation, inability to take advantage of the revolutionary situation. The Polish and other communist parties followed the lead of the Russian Communist Party because of its high moral authority, for it was the only one that was able to carry out a victorious revolution at that time. The authority of the All-Union Communist Party Bolsheviks led to the fact that the Polish Communist Party became a sect that kind of echoed what came down from above without thinking much about the content of this policy. This aspect of society is reflected in a song by Boris Grebenshchikov, A Plane, composed in 1981.
Мы стояли на плоскости с переменным углом отражения, наблюдая закон, приводящий пейзажи в движение, повторяя слова, лишенные всякого смысла, но без напряжения, без напряжения.
A leader of the Polish Stalinists, Władysław Gomulka, wrote the following: My faith in the Communist Party of Poland, in the party authority, as well as in the idea of socialism in general, was no different from the faith in God and the Holy Church of the followers of the Roman Catholic religion. Being a communist, I behaved towards the party in exactly the same way as a deeply religious Catholic behaves towards his professing priest, to whose every question he answers sincerely without hiding anything. Isaac Deutscher writes that the authority of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was used to strengthen the power of nomenclatura. Quote, the moral authority of the Soviet Party, the only party that led the proletarian revolution to victory, was so great that the Polish communists accepted Moscow's decisions even when Moscow abused its revolutionary authority. Stalinism represented a constant chain of such abuses, the systematic exploitation of the moral credit of the revolution for purposes that often had nothing to do with the interests of communism, but only served to consolidate the bureaucratic regime in the USSR. End of quote. The authority of the Russian Revolution is still used to prop up the likes of Gennady Zyuganov in Russia and other neo-Stalinists. In 1928, we see the struggle between the factions of Stalin and Bukharin. Deutsche writes, having disagreed with Bukharin on issues of domestic policy, Stalin decided to eradicate Bukharin's influence in the Comintern and change international communist policy. This automatically led to the condemnation of the majority in the Polish Communist Party. Dvorsky and Kostyva were deprived of any influence. They had previously supported Bukharin. The steering wheel was turned strongly to the left. In 1929, Vyacheslav Molotov, the one who signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939, created a theory about the so-called third period. According to this theory, the capitalist world is in a directly revolutionary situation. Therefore, the communist movement must move to an offensive struggle for power. Social democracy, henceforth called social fascism, is the main and most dangerous enemy of communism. Moreover, the left wing of the social democratic parties is more dangerous than their right wing. Communists must direct the fire of struggle against this enemy. They are prohibited from entering into any agreements with the socialists. They must create their own red trade unions, splitting the general trade unions, and with their help organize general strikes and armed uprisings. End of quote. This policy was carried out from 1929 to 1934. In 1933, Hitler came to power in Germany, partially thanks to the policy of the third period. In 1934, this ultra-left policy was replaced by the ultra-right policy of the Popular Front. Deutsche writes, "The Popular Front was the direct opposite of the policy of the third period. Yesterday's social fascists have turned into anti-fascist fighters." In 1936-1937, massive repressions of communists took place in the USSR. Foreign communists were summoned to Moscow, arrested, and shot. We read in more detail about the Polish episode. The Polish operation of the NKVD began on August 11, 1937, by order number 00485 of the People's Commissar of Internal Affairs Yezhov. During this operation, at least 139,835 people were repressed on false charges of belonging to the Polish military organization and espionage and sabotage activities in 1937-1938, 111,091 of whom were shot. In 1938, Stalin, believing that the Communist Party of Poland was infected with Trotskyism and was an agent of the Polish political police, decided to dissolve it altogether. On this occasion, Stalin told Dimitrov that we were 2 years late with the dissolution of the Communist Party of Poland. A quote from The Collapse of the Comintern by Vladimir Pyatnitsky. Deutscher comments on the dissolution of the CPP. The leadership managed to stifle all discussion and terrorize party members to such an extent that they began to avoid us, that is, the opposition, with the same superstitious fear with which faithful parishioners avoid excommunicated heretics. The opposition was hermetically isolated from the party, and by 1936 had virtually no contact with it. Thus, the accusation that the Communist Party of Poland had become a Trotskyist agent was clearly a fabrication. But nevertheless, the doubts and thoughts that the opposition sowed in the party continued to germinate. Even while party members remained conformists, many of them never stopped listening to the voice of the opposition. It influenced them to a greater or lesser extent, at least enough to make them skeptical about the holy scripture of Stalinism. And since nothing in nature ever completely disappears, Luxembourg's heritage was not completely lost either, despite years of eradication. The influence of the opposition and the influence of this tradition was such that even after Bolshevization, the psychological profile of the most devout Polish communist from the Stalinist point of view left much to be desired. This was the case in the 1930s. Fortunately, this was also the case after the Second World War. During this entire period, a certain law of continuity never ceased to operate. End of quote. The fact that the law of continuity is in effect was shown by the activities of many communists and workers in Poland in the 1950s, for example, the Voltairean Club organized by Jacek Kuron. In the late 1930s, the Comintern completely suppressed communist activities in Poland. In the neo-Stalinist monograph, Poland in the 20th Century, which we will cite often, we read, the initiative and organizational activities of the communists, a considerable part of whom 2,000 to 3,000 functionaries of the CPP in the fall of 1939 and in the first half of 1940 moved to the territory of the USSR, mainly to Lvov and Bialystok, was largely constrained by the decisions of the Executive Committee of the Comintern on the dissolution of the Communist Party of Poland in 1938. There was a ban on party members engaging in political activities until Moscow gave instructions on the possibilities of restoring the party, which could only happen with the permission of the Comintern and under its mandate. The Polish communists who tried to resist the dissolution of the Communist Party of Poland were destroyed by Stalin during the Second World War. For example, the initiator of the split in the Polish Workers' Party, PPR, created by Stalin in 1942, was Leon Lipski, Lukasz, the only member of the central leadership of the CPP, the head of its all-Polish secretariat, who survived during the mass extermination of Polish communists during the Great Terror in the USSR. Lipski continued to protest against the destruction of the CPP and called not to obey the decisions of the Comintern because, as he believed, the Comintern served primarily the state interests of the USSR and not the international communist movement. Therefore, Lipski was not accepted into the PPR, took steps to publish his own newspaper, and took measures to restore the CPP, which, as he believed, would create its own government after the war. The PPR considered Lipski's actions a fascist provocation. On June 21, 1943, he was killed. Second section: the destruction of Old Poland. The war between Poland and Germany in 1939 began similarly to how it began between Ukraine and Russia in 2022. Combat usually begins with small operations that test the enemy's readiness to repel a major attack. In the monograph Poland in the 20th Century, we read, in fact, Germany's military operations against Poland began on August 25-26 in the mountains on the passes, groups of German saboteurs, from 30 to 100 people each, were already concentrated. Commander groups attacked Polish settlements, railway stations, train stations, and customs posts. They fired at trains, sought to capture the Jablunkowski Pass and the tunnel, which opened the way to Katowice, Sosnowiec, Bytom, and other cities of Silesia and the Dabrowski Basin, to metallurgical and coal mining centers. Several groups of German counterintelligence officers and commandos, in the guise of miners and metallurgists, crossed the border and tried, with the help of local German population, to take possession of the most important economic objects in western and central Poland. On August 25th, the battleship Schleswig-Holstein arrived in Gdańsk with a supposed goodwill mission. September 1st, 1939, at 4 o'clock in the morning, this battleship fired at the Polish military base of Westerplatte, and Luftwaffe planes began to bomb chief cities and airfields. The Polish state did not offer serious resistance to Nazi Germany. The USSR ambassador to England, Ivan Maisky, wrote, "The weakness of the Poles is amazing. They are retreating everywhere. They can't stay anywhere longer than a few hours, at most 1-2 days. There are no major battles. True, the Germans are crushing them with motorization and aviation, but still. No, apparently it's not just motorization. It looks like the Polish state was rotten through and through, so rotten that its army was unable to provide any serious resistance to the enemy, even under the slogan of defending national independence." The Nazi plans for the Polish people are similar to those that NATO has prepared today for the former Soviet republics. Krakow was declared the capital of the general government. At the head of its government was a governor vested with unlimited power, General Frank. Upon taking up the position, he stated, "From now on, the political role of the Polish people is over. They are declared a labor force, nothing more. We will ensure that the very concept of Poland is erased forever. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth or any other Polish state will never be revived." The very concept of human dignity was supposed to be erased. In both German parts of the Polish lands, a strict policy was pursued to suppress the national identity and culture of the Poles. The goal was to reduce the population of Poland to the position of powerless slaves, deprived of national traditions and social demands. To instill in the Poles the feeling of being doomed to moral and physical destruction. For the population of the German East, Himmler asserted, there can be no schools higher than fourth grade. The test of such a public school is extremely simple: to teach counting to 500, to write a name, and to instill that God's command is obedience to the Germans, courtesy, speed, humility. I don't consider it necessary to teach reading. According to Bormann, Hitler's deputy in the party, Slavs must work and die when they become unnecessary to the Germans. Healthcare, therefore, is unnecessary. Education is not necessary. It is enough for a Slav to be able to count to 100. On the other hand, from the east, on September 17, 1939, Soviet troops invaded Poland on the basis of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, according to which Poland was divided into German and Soviet spheres of influence. Polish troops in the east surrendered. In March of 1940, the Soviet leadership shot Polish officers on the grounds that they had waged anti-Soviet agitation in captivity. Regarding the attack of Germany and the USSR on Poland, the Communists of Poland adhered to a pro-Moscow Stalinist position, thereby isolating themselves from the society. Their position did not reflect the basic needs and desires of the Polish people. Slogans were repeated about Poland as the 17th Republic of the USSR, about the inevitability of the dictatorship of the proletariat and the intensification of the class struggle. The Soviet form of power was absolutized. In conditions when the actions of the USSR in September 1939 were unanimously regarded by the Poles as aggression, when the different political forces of Poland were united by the desire to return the seized territories, the Communists could not have serious support in Polish society. In some ways, they are reminiscent of those leftists who support Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022.